The burning question that I get so often is, are you going to re-roll? Are you going to do something? If you were going to re-roll, though, what are you going to re-roll to, Preacher? Let us know. And in some ways, it's a veiled attempt to say, what do you think is the best class in the game right now? What would you play? Similar to what we did pre-expansion, and we'll be doing it again before the next expansion. But I definitely have expressed a number of occasions frustration with my Mage, which is my main character right now, and leads a lot of people to, well, why don't you give it up? Well, there's a number of reasons to that. My frustration stems from things I don't think are ordinarily going to be cured. And also, and I think this is important, Legion has asked us to invest more into a single character than any expansion since ever, maybe vanilla. I think we could go back that far. Like in TBC, wasn't that bad to re-roll. It wasn't that bad any other time. And even people re-roll to this day without running into much issue. But certainly with AP and collecting all the legendaries, once you've got a character that like has all the legendaries like mine has, or is very, very deep into progression along an artifact weapon, the temptation to reroll becomes less and less because I just don't want to go through that again. Despite me having a vast selection of characters to choose from, we will already have sort of a decent legendary collection among some of them, it's still not there for me to re-roll. Now, two things to address here. One, what's my frustration with the Mage? And two, what would I re-roll to? So, firstly, frustration with the Mage. Well, Blizzard took a different direction in Legion, and you might remember this, or in fact, you might have forgotten that this is how it went down, which is often why the legacies are quite cool, because you can remember these things. But Legion, at the start of Legion, what they decided to do is any spec in the game that relies on getting like a certain amount of a stat in order to be played as it's supposed to be played and reach its real gameplay potential, they passively gave it to you at the start because gear wasn't going to provide enough of it, right? So let's say a Fire Mage. A Fire Mage relies on a reasonable amount of crit. And certainly at the start of the expansion, Blizzard solved the problem that gear wasn't going to give it you by lumping a load of crit into the Fire Mage passively to say, even with crappy gear, this thing will still play okay. And this was to solve the historic problem that without this passive bonus, you weren't going to start seeing this spec really take off until later in the expansion when much better gear had been introduced into the game, so you had the stats to make it work. And I think for the most part, at the start of the expansion, we were very thankful of that. The problem was, gear gets better in the game. And what happens then is you end up with all these passive bonuses, and now you're at the point where your gear is actually pretty good. That's a problem, because you're now way, way ahead in terms of your stats than what you should be. So some of you will remember the great secondary stat squish that happened. It also wanted to solve the problem of item level, where item level was just frankly irrelevant and it was screwing up masses of players because most players, just stick on the highest item level shit they've got, right? Let's face facts. And that's really funny because those of us who are a little bit nerdier about the game, let's put it that way for gentle terms, realized just how fundamentally stupid this was because people were taking massive downgrades, despite the fact that the item levels they were equipping were better. So Blizzard decided to fix two things in one go. One was to reduce the power of secondary stats so that our main stats like intellect and strength, they should be better than getting haste and crit and all that kind of stuff. And we're kind of teetering on the edge where that's no longer the case. Certainly with mages, they'll tell you it's like, well, int's like my worst stat now. Yeah, that is happening again now. But also to quash all these phantom stats that we can call that classes got at the beginning of the expansion in order to bring everything back in line. Now, what that meant and why this is important is that your class went backwards, which hasn't really happened before. I don't recall it happening before, where our classes were at a certain point of gameplay and then they moved them backwards. They didn't move them a lot. They did some last-minute tweaks because some of us, including myself, were testing them out on the PTR and going, wow, my class feels horrible now. It feels worse than it did when I had blue gear on. This makes no sense. This is terrible. So they didn't go as far with it as they were intending to do, but what they did do is quash a number of things. And then basically we almost had a restart, is how it feels. We had a restart like mid-expansion to move back up. Now, coming from somebody who played their Mage almost exclusively up until the Broken Shores release, I could tell you it felt really weird. It felt not fun to progress and feel some sense of progression to the point where we were kind of overpowered. I think that's fair to say. Mages were very overpowered for a little period of time there. And then suddenly be quashed back to the point where we were like, not only are we no longer overpowered, but you killed our spec, which has happened to a number of classes. I'm sure you'll agree if you're one of them. It's like, hey, we remember this adage from before Legion. It's like, don't worry, if you invest a lot of stuff into one weapon, we're not going to kill your spec or anything like that. Yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. I feel like they didn't have much of a choice, but still, that is the hypocrisy that went down. And we actually changed specs over to a different one. We went from fire to frost, for raiding, I'm talking about here, for high-end raiding. And now we're back to fire again, as it's come back into its niche of what it's supposed to do. Now, what this means is I've had a very humdrum kind of time with my mage over the course of the expansion, where it felt bad, it kind of felt okay, then it felt bad again, and now it's kind of feeling okay again. And that's generally the methodology that's gone on. So that's created a kind of stale gameplay experience. Very stale gameplay experience. Now, I want to lump something on top of here that's very mage specific. Some other classes didn't really experience it as bad as mages, I want to say, specifically the Frost Mage, is that for a very, very long time, the Frost Mage was able to take advantage of an unintended mechanic. Let's put it that way. An unintended mechanic of the double ice lance. Now, some people hated it. Some people absolutely detested this mechanic. I was not one of those people. I actually found it extremely enjoyable to do this because it made the spec far more involved and far more fun. Classically, you would expect a mage to sort of stand still and fire spells and move when necessary and then just go back to shooting frostbolts or fireballs and things like that, right? But with double ice lance, in fact, you were on the move constantly. You were very, very involved and very, very engaged. Now, as somebody who's classically a melee player, I really enjoyed this, and the fact that if it went well, you could pull off some extraordinary DPS made it that much more enjoyable. I talked often pre-Legion about moments of glory, where your spec is able to utilize its capabilities to do something that nobody else in the game can do. It doesn't happen very often, but once you can do it, it feels very satisfying and very rewarding, and it's something I recommend everybody look for in their spec. Now, they quashed it. It's kind of back now. It's kind of back now due to an unintentional change, but not quite as it was. Let's put it that way. For those who are going to go, it's back in the game. Yeah, we know, but it's not quite as it was. And ultimately, it's not something that's played. But that's not the point. The point here is that something I found extremely enjoyable was then taken away. And what we were left with is how the mage was supposed to play. Now, this is the irony, isn't it? It's actually playing as it's supposed to be played. But that's not as fun as the other way that it could be played. And I think that's a fair argument, despite the fact saying you shouldn't be bitching about this because you're now playing your character as it was intended to be played. They're absolutely correct. The fact of the matter is, for months and months and months, they gave us a different choice. And for some of us, and quite a lot of us, it was a very enjoyable thing. Utilizing it and maximizing your potential for your character was a very enjoyable experience that we got to have for months and months, and then we got dialed back yet again. So remember, that's 2 dial backs on my class that I've had over the course of Legion that have dropped the fun in some way. They've dropped the fun in some way. Now, all that is kind of minor things. Well, the first one with the stat squish affected everybody, so it's not something that's personal to me. The second one was more personal to me, but it was understood, and we also knew it was going to happen. And we knew it was going to happen. Doesn't mean I'm still not sad and bitter that it went away, but it's still the point that, yeah, we knew this was going to be fixed at some point. This isn't something we were totally, like, in the dark over saying, well, Blizzard's just going to leave this alone. No, obviously not. They don't like disparity among specs between one player and another by the biggest margin ever, which you could do with the double ice lance trick. So, yes, I've expressed some frustration. I've also expressed some frustration with the RNG elements of DPS. It was one of the reasons I stopped DPSing towards Draenor. For those of you who don't recall that, I'll just give you a brief synopsis here, is that I was a rogue up until Hellfire Citadel when I went back to tanking. And the reason I did that is while progressing Mythic Warlord Blackhand, my pull was identical for hundreds of pulls. It was a very, very difficult boss. But my DPS was always different, sometimes massively different. And there was nothing I could do about it. And it became extremely frustrating for me to repeat exactly like autopilot. I could plug these things into a computer and press these buttons for me and see massively different results. I became very frustrated that the DPS or the potential damage and output of my character wasn't down to me. It was nothing to do with me. And it was when the competitiveness of DPS, and I truly believe the best time to be a DPSer is when it's a very, very competitive scene. Especially the higher up you get, you want to be competitive. You want to be able to try as hard as you can in order to get the best results. And you also want to feel satisfaction that the result you get is because of you. And when that went away, I started to drift away. Now, I went back to tanking, and then I had another kid. So that was kind of my end of my WoD dream. In Legion, I spoke to a number of people, and we all agreed that DPSing is still the most competitive area of the game. And that's where I want to be. Despite my love of tanking, and I absolutely love tanking, it was still the best place to be in order to feel rewarded for doing so, in which I made the choice to be a mage, and that video exists as to how I landed on the mage, just with all the other specs in there. And the RNG that Mage suffers, which it does do, it does suffer for some RNG for its results, and I personally don't believe, and this might be controversial to some of you, but I personally don't believe in the world of Titan Forging, the world of AP, the world of Nether Crucible for sure, that there's really a competitive scene for DPS, and rankings and stuff mean nothing to me personally anymore. They don't. I will frankly, and people will see me do this all the time, while despite the fact that, sure, I can crush DPS if I really go at it, most of the time I'm going to go and do some other mechanic, which will cost me some damage, but frankly, I don't care. There's not really... I don't see the ranking system in World of Warcraft anymore as a fair playing field, and being competitive on an unfair playing field is... frankly, pointless. In my opinion, anyway. That's my opinion on it. Never playing side by side with somebody of equal value is how I would put it. So, having said that, that's why I wouldn't re-roll away. What am I going to re-roll to? Because pretty much every spec in the game suffers from this in one form or another. There are one or two which are purely down to your gameplay. Right? They're purely down to your gameplay and have very, very little effect on RNG. I think that's fair to say. Yet those are not particularly specs that intrigue me in any way. In fact, those specs are more static than they are fun. Some elements of RNG are actually really enjoyable. You can't have moments of glory generally without some randomness going on. If everything hit for one, a lot of people talk about class balance, but if every spec in the game hit for one, so we could have perfect class balance, that would be the worst game of all time, right? That would be totally not fun in any way. You want your uniqueness to shine, and generally some RNG has to fall in there in order to make that happen. And when there's very little to no RNG involved, it can be very stale very quickly. You're just kind of on a treadmill where you've just got to press the right buttons, and it's definitely down to more personal skill, but that's the situation. So those are the reasons I wouldn't re-roll away. I don't really see an advantage other than I play some specs sometimes. Certainly when you watch the TDP, you'll see me playing specs, which I'm clearly loving. I'm absolutely having a whale of a time. But in terms of giving up everything I've progressed on my mage, am I that bothered? No, not really. Sure, we get frustrated sometimes, but who doesn't get frustrated sometimes with their spec? In the overall grand scheme of things, not even close. Not even close at all. Anyway, let's move on to, though, if I was going to reroll, and you certainly can reroll in Legion. I think we should address that now. You can reroll in Legion. We've had 5 rerolls in my guild, and it's been fine. It's been no big deal at all. Gear is accessible from so many different locations. It basically comes down to Legos, but with the Lego rebalancing, and I know this community perception still exists to this day, that there is some enormous differences between BIS and not quite BIS legendaries, which... if you look at the statistics, if you look at the numbers, it's nowhere near as big of a deal as a lot of the casual player base believe it is. Certainly a lot of the player base who aren't keeping informed on things like Sims, and when you present the numbers to them, they just kind of tell you to piss off because it doesn't fit what they want to believe, which is either the best one or I've got an absolute dog turd. But with the rebalancing of legendaries Blizzard did mid-expansion, it's actually no longer the case. Even ones that seem terrible, they have so many stats and stuff on them that they're actually really good. I still know people who are like, oh god, I got a Pride As, what a waste of time. It's an amazing item. It's so good. It really is so goddamn good, particularly if you're going to be riding around Argus. Anyway, what would I reroll to? Well, I have definitely got some regrets about being a mage. One of them is that I can't tank on my mage. I will never again play a spec in this game, for as long as I continue to play this game, as a main character that cannot tank. I've tried it twice now. I was a rogue and I was a mage, and I've regretted it every single time. There are just so many benefits to having a tank or a healer role that it is worth me investing the time to have those specs up to scratch, in my opinion. The amount of just queue times, the amount of just general, I want to get something done, I want to solo something. All these things that you can just get on with whenever you feel like. Having the ability to switch over to a tank. I prefer a tank to a healer, just because I prefer tanking to healing. Nothing mega there. But I will never again play a spec in this game as a main character that cannot tank. I've regretted it so much every single time, and there's usually something at least 6 times a week that I wish I was a tank. I wish I could just spec to a tank. And then when I switch over to my Demon Hunter or my DK or my Monk or my Paladin or my Warrior, any of these specs or my Druid, and I go out and about in the world on those, and I'm like, God damn, do I wish I could do this. God damn. And certainly with the Mythic Plus system, like, I made the video when we got into the Pug World, is I have no idea how you guys who stick 100% to DPS live in the Pug Mythic Plus world, for those of you who do, because it's just so much harder. So much harder, so much more discriminatory, so much more just unforgiving, frustrating, time wasting, all these things where if I could just switch to a tank spec, I would have none of those problems. None of those problems whatsoever. So I will be doing that. So that instantly limits our choices down. I have a huge fondness for the Monk. Vast, just a stupid amount of fondness actually for the Monk. I love it. I absolutely love it. And I've said this, probably the most repeated line on the TDP is I wish with all my heart I could spend more time with it in order to master it. Because you'll know, like, I can do a very high Mythic Plus and a very decent raid on any spec in the game at any given time at a moment's notice. I'll make some mistakes because it's not my main spec, right? With playing 36 specs, which is what are in the game right now, when, say, my stream says play X spec, and it might be a spec I've not played for months, we'll do fine. We'll do totally fine. Won't be maximum potential because, you know, that takes practice and time on a specific spec. But we can go. We'll go balance. We'll go survival. We'll switch to enhancement. We'll switch to frost. We'll switch to havoc. We'll switch to whatever the hell you pick out of this game, and we'll do just fine. Will be 95% of its potential, right? 95% of that spec's potential, and that's generally why you guys come here, is because that's what you're going to see. You're going to see some stupid mistake at some point, of course you are, but generally speaking, that's what you're going to see. Now, when I look through it, and I think about specs that are DPS and tanking, I still live by the mantra that I don't want 3 specs. Now, this will become entirely subjective down to you guys. I don't want the choice of 3 roles, because I still feel the compulsion to keep them up to scratch. And this is always something difficult for you guys to, or some of you guys, to really understand, but it's my compulsion. My compulsion is if I play a druid, and I'm a main feral druid, right? I have a compulsion within me as a raider, as a long-term raider who has seen many raids that have kind of stalled because we could have used an extra healer, an extra tank, an extra range DPS, something like that. I feel compelled to keep my Guardian spec up to scratch, my Balance spec up to scratch, and my Resto spec up to scratch as much as I could possibly do. And that's far too much investment for me. Even working within creating World of Warcraft content, I find it obscenely time-consuming to really push a spec to its maximum and get that ready, right? Certainly with 4, like in the Druid's case. So the Druid is out. Not only that, though, I do want to say, like, the Druid specs I don't love. Personally, I don't love. I like the healing style of the Resto Druid. I think it's great. I prefer other healers. I prefer to play a Paladin, I prefer to play a Mistweaver, and I prefer to play a Resto Shaman, and I certainly prefer to play a Priest. So, as much as I love the Resto Druid, and I do enjoy it, I don't think it's a bad spec at all, in any way, shape, or form. I don't love it. And it's not something I would like to be pigeonholed into at some point. Similar with Balance. I'm fine with Balance. I don't think it's as good as it used to be. Always caused a big kickoff. You could look at the Legion videos where I was like, you know what? I just don't dig this as much as I used to dig the Balance Druid in the other expansions. That's my opinion. I don't like it. I don't like the new Starfall. I don't like the way the dots work. I find it very generic. And people have a problem with that. But for me, it just doesn't tickle me. That's fair to say. I'm allowed to say that, right? Shouldn't upset anybody. Guardian, the same. I think Guardian's better than it's been for a long time. I still don't think it's super fun. It's very stock. I find it very stock, the Guardian Druid. It has all the basics I need, but flair and excitement just don't tick. They just don't happen. They're just like, this bit that really gets me like, this this is cool. This is fucking cool. The Guardian Druid just doesn't do it for me. So Guardian's out. Demon Hunter is really up there. It's really, really up there. The Demon Hunter is really up there. Now that Demon Blades is not the nightmare it used to be, and I certainly know when I played my Demon Hunter a lot, for a short period of time, I was playing Demon Hunter all the time. You might remember I actually recommended the Demon Hunter for the spec or the class you should play if you're not raiding. If you are not a raider and you want to just play this game and do everything you could possibly do, I still stand by my choice. The Demon Hunter is amazing for that. It's incredible for that. And I recommend you do that every time. But I don't love it. I don't love Havoc. I love Vengeance. I really like Vengeance. I do not love Havoc. And you have to love a spec if you're going to re-roll to it. If you're going to throw hours of your life into it, you gotta love it. I don't love Havoc. I still think Metamorphosis is garbage. It's absolutely garbage and boring, and I don't like it. Now, why do I not like it, Preach? He turns into a giant fucking demon. It's because nothing happens gameplay-wise. You're just using the same two abilities that you were using without using Mage. You just now look like a demon while you do it, which appeals to a lot of people, because you can't really screw it up. You can't really screw it up or do badly with it, but it's not for me. The Warrior. I like the Warrior, man. I even like Arms now. That's weird, isn't it? Arms is terrible for the longest time, but I quite like Arms now. It's not as RNG as it used to be. It's a little stale, sure, but it does what it wants to do, and you can really just see these giant numbers popping off the head of certain characters, and that's really fun. It's really, really fun, but it's not for me. It's not going to happen. And certainly tanking is just... I find tanking on a Warrior just to be the most tedious thing ever. It doesn't even make sense to me. I don't know what Ignore Pain is supposed to be. I still don't. And maybe people say, what does it matter? It's just a function of the game. And I agree. I'm not the one to get most immersed in class fantasy. I'm never going to be that guy. But there are points where even it tips the balance for me. And Ignore Pain is one of those things. I find it just utterly ridiculous and so dull compared to what the Warrior used to be. And which is still quite sad for me, as my Warrior is my go-to character since, 12 years ago. No surprises then. Probably not the Paladin. I've ragged on the Paladin a lot. Holy has come a long way, but I still don't feel and I don't want to go too much detail here because people get ticked off by it, because I've really ragged on the Paladin a lot over Legion, and I think a lot of my comments have been fair. I really do. I think my comments have been fair. It's still very plain Jane. It's lost a lot of the flavor I think the Paladin used to have, and it's not quite there, and it's just it's too static. It's too static and not doing what it wants to do, and Prot feels a little bit too... The loss of just holy power management, something as simple as that is just really taking it down a notch for me. So no surprise that if I was going to re-roll now, like if I could go back in time and start Legion again, I would be a Death Knight right now. Without question. I would be a Death Knight right now. First of all, let's get out of the way. I like all three of the specs. I'm not super hype on Frost, but I like Frost. I'm fine with it. And to love 2 out of 3 specs and be fine and totally okay with the third would be great. That's a good situation to be in for anybody who is playing World of Warcraft a lot, is I love 2 of the 3 specs this class has, and the third one, I don't love it, but I don't hate it at all. I actually really enjoy it. I just don't love it, which is the scenario I'm in with my DK. Now, some of you might see that as, certainly the Mythic Raiders are going, really? Really? Are you talking about blood? Are you flavor of the month thing? No, I've always loved my DK. Like, the reason I haven't re-rolled it to a DK since Kata is because I already had World First on the DK, and I wanted to do it with different specs. And that's kind of out of the window now, going back to the ranking situation we're in now, something I really hope returns in the next expansion. But the fact of the matter is, I'm pretty convinced now that I'm always a melee player. I don't think I can play ranged, really. It doesn't tickle me. It feels less involved. I kind of just want to be on my own all the time when I play ranged, and naturally, I don't like that. I don't like being stood on my own, but the way ranged works favors doing that, and I don't really like it. I want to be a melee. Not only that, Blood DK, ever since I played it, man, it's good. It's really fun. It is really, really fun. And even with the simple change of making a flea... I mean, I ragged on the Blood DK rotten in the Legion Alpha, and with good reason, and it did get changed because of it, because it was super boring. And just the simple switch of moving Blood Boil in to give your fingers nice motion and things to keep track of and keep them moving, all that really played into making the Blood DK so fun. The mobility issues don't bother me. The grass always looks greener, in my opinion. And I know people... it's a meme at this point about Blood DK mobility. And sure, they're the slowest. There's no getting away from it. They're the slowest, but it's not enough to turn me away from a spec I truly enjoy, especially with so many other options for mobility enhancement from other people. Whether it's a Tiger's Lust or a Savage Roar or a Grip or a Bubble or a Feather or whatever the hell it might be, there are ways around it that make it not that big of a deal. And that's what I like. It's not that big of a deal to me. And particularly Unholy, I love Unholy. It's so good. I love how involved it is. And dare I say, I love the class fantasy. It does everything it says on the tin. It's a little bit more complex than a Demon Hunter, I think it's fair to say. Certainly with one added spec to learn, should you want to learn all of them. But more to the point, I love DPSing on it, where I don't love Havoc, and that's what tilts it over. So there you go. That's what I would be. If I could go back in time, I would certainly be a DK right now. Now, the next question is usually, will I be a DK next expansion? Now, that is an impossible question to answer because there is going to be a whole bunch of changes for the next expansion for every single class and spec in the game. For all I know, they're going to delete Frost and reduce everybody down to 2 specs. Right? Improbable. But it could happen. It could happen, and therefore, I don't know right now, and nobody should be asking that question because we don't know what's happening next expansion. So there you go, guys. There's the answer. Love you all. Bye-bye.